You know, you think you know someone. You spend 25 years building a life with them, brick by painful, beautiful brick. You raise a daughter. You navigate illnesses and job losses. You celebrate the small wins, like finally getting the garden to grow tomatoes. You share a bed, a bank account, 1,000 inside jokes that no one else would ever get. That was my life with Mark. He wasn't just my husband. He was the bedrock of my world. And then, one Tuesday morning, the ground just gave way. A heart attack, the doctor said. Swift, brutal, and final. One minute he was complaining about the price of coffee. The next, he was gone. My world didn't just shatter. It ceased to exist. The week that followed was a surreal blur of casseroles and condolences. People I hadn't seen in years filled our home, their faces a gallery of pity. They'd hug me, whisper, "He's in a better place," and I'd nod, my soul screaming that his place was here, with me. Through it all, my daughter, Chloe, was a ghost. She moved through the crowds, a perfect porcelain doll of grief, but her eyes were miles away. When I tried to hold her hand, her fingers were cold and stiff, pulling away as if my touch burned her. I told myself it was her way of coping, that we were all just lost in our own private oceans of pain. I had no idea she was already adrift in a completely different sea. The real gut punch, the one that made the grief feel like a gentle tap on the shoulder, came in Mr. Abernathy's office. The room was the cliché of a small-town lawyer. Dark wood, the smell of old paper and stale coffee, and a ticking clock on the wall that seemed to be counting down the seconds of my old life. I sat on a stiff leather chair that squeaked with every breath, trying again to hold Chloe's hand. She let me for a moment, then pulled away to check a notification on her phone, her face illuminated by the cold, blue light. Mr. Abernathy, a kind man whose wrinkles seemed etched by the sorrows of others, cleared his throat. "Sarah, Chloe," he began, his voice a low, sympathetic murmur. "We're here to go over Mark's last will and testament. I must say, he was very specific with his instructions." I managed a weak, watery smile. That was Mark, always had a plan for everything. I braced myself, expecting the familiar, comforting legal language that would confirm the life we'd built was secure. The house, the savings, the business we started from our garage, it would all be structured to take care of us. It was the only thing that made sense. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his half-moon glasses and began to read from the document. I, Mark Vance, being of sound mind and body, he droned on through the legal preamble before getting to the heart of it. To my beloved daughter, Chloe Vance, I bequeath our primary residence located at 124 Willow Creek Lane, Scottsdale, Arizona, and its entire contents, to be hers and hers alone. The words didn't register at first. It was like hearing a foreign language. I think I might have laughed. A short, sharp, hysterical sound that made the lawyer flinch. I whipped my head to look at Chloe, expecting to see the same dumbfounded shock on her face, but there was nothing. Her expression was a blank wall, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on a point just over Mr. Abernathy's shoulder. She didn't even blink. He continued, his voice unwavering, as if he were reading a grocery list. Furthermore, I bequeath to my daughter, Chloe Vance, the entirety of my liquid assets, including all savings and checking accounts, investment portfolios, and retirement funds, totaling an approximate value of $5 million. The room began to tilt. $5 million. Our money. The money I'd helped earn, penny by penny. The late nights I'd spent doing the books for the business. The vacations we'd skipped to save. The dreams we'd built for our future. All of it, wiped away and handed to my daughter, who sat beside me like a stone statue. And to my wife, Sarah Vance. The lawyer's voice softened with a pity that felt like acid on my skin. Mark has left you the property he purchased 20 years ago. The deed and keys are in this envelope. It's an old cabin up in the Coconino National Forest. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. It landed in front of me with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. An old cabin. A dilapidated hunting shack Mark had bought on a whim. We went there once for a weekend. It was a disaster. Leaky roof, no reliable power, and miles from civilization. It was a forgotten joke, and it was all I had left. I looked from the insulting envelope to my daughter's face, searching for a flicker of protest, of confusion, of anything. I found nothing but a cold, quiet resolve. It was in that moment, in that sterile, suffocating office, that a terrifying realization washed over me. colder and more final than grief itself. I hadn't just lost my husband. I had been deliberately and surgically excised from my own life, and the two people I loved most in the world had held the knife. If you guys are as shocked as I was, please hit that like button and comment below where you're watching from. And don't forget to follow, because you are not going to believe what I found in that old cabin. This story is just getting started. The drive north from Scottsdale was a journey through my own personal hell. Each mile that put the sprawling, sun-bleached suburbs in my rearview mirror felt like another piece of my identity being stripped away. The familiar saguaro cacti, standing like silent sentinels of the life I was leaving, slowly gave way to the stark, imposing pines of the high country. I drove my old Honda, the one Mark always joked was held together by duct tape and prayer, on pure, numb autopilot. Chloe had made a show of offering me one of the Range Rovers. "You can take the black one if you want, Mom. It's safer." The words were a hollow courtesy, a performance for an audience of one. Her eyes held no warmth, only a distant, chilling pity. I refused. I would rather walk than take another handout in the life that was no longer mine. The 2 weeks I was given to vacate the house, her house, were the longest of my life. Every object I touched screamed with memories. Mark's favorite coffee mug, the worn spot on the armchair where he read the paper, the faint pencil marks on the doorframe tracking Chloe's height through the years. It was a museum of a life I was now barred from. Packing was a form of self-flagellation. I moved in a fog, while Chloe directed a team of professional movers with a brisk, unnerving efficiency. She was a stranger, a CEO liquidating a failed asset, and that asset was me. The one time I broke down, sobbing over a box of old photo albums, she didn't comfort me. She simply placed a box of tissues beside me and said, "The movers need this hallway clear in 10 minutes. The turnoff for the cabin was an unmarked dirt road, a scar on the side of the highway that I almost missed twice. My Honda protested loudly, its undercarriage scraping against rocks and its tires spinning in the loose gravel. After 20 minutes of this bone-jarring punishment, I saw it. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted into a dark, cold abyss. The cabin was a caricature of neglect. The porch sagged like a tired old man, a shutter hung from a single hinge, and the windows were opaque with years of grime. A sign that once might have had a name was now just a piece of gray, weathered wood. This was my inheritance, a pile of rotting timber meant to be my tomb. The rusty key from the envelope grated in the lock, but the door groaned open. The smell hit me first, a potent cocktail of damp earth, mildew, and the faint, musky scent of animal occupation. It was a single, cavernous room, swallowed by shadows. A monstrous stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rickety table with 2 mismatched chairs sat in the center, and a bare, stained mattress on a simple metal frame was tucked into a corner. Everything, every single surface, was draped in a thick gray blanket of dust and cobwebs. I dropped my one suitcase, and the sound was swallowed by the oppressive dead silence. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from my throat. This was it. This was the punchline to the cruel joke my life had become. A 48-year-old widow, discarded and left to rot. For 2 days, I was paralyzed. I sat on that lumpy, disgusting mattress and let the waves of despair, anger, and profound loneliness wash over me until I was numb. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I just stared at the decaying walls and wondered what I had done to deserve this. On the 3rd day, as the sun streamed through a grimy window, illuminating a universe of dancing dust motes, something inside me snapped. It was a tiny, hard kernel of rage. I would not let this be the end. I would not let Mark's betrayal, or Chloe's coldness, or this pathetic shack be the final chapter of my story. Fueled by a fury I didn't know I possessed, I began to clean. It was a frantic, punishing exorcism. I tore down cobwebs, scrubbed decades of filth from the floorboards, and dragged the mattress outside to beat it with a fallen branch until clouds of dust choked the air. It was mindless, exhausting work, and it was saving my life. I was sweeping the stone hearth around the fireplace, attacking the floor with a vengeance, when the broom head snagged hard on a loose floorboard. I'd passed over it a dozen times, but this time, it caught just right, lifting the edge of the plank a fraction of an inch. Curiosity, the first emotion other than rage or despair I'd felt in days, pricked at me. I got on my hands and knees, my fingers raw from scrubbing, and pried at the board. It was stuck fast. I used the end of the broom as a lever. putting all my weight into it until, with a splintering crack, the board came loose. And there, nestled in the dark, spider-filled space between the floor joists, was a metal box. It was an old, olive-drab military ammo can, heavy and sealed with a thick, rusty padlock. My heart, which I thought had gone dormant, began to hammer against my ribs. Why would Mark, the most meticulous man I knew, hide a box here, under the floor of this forgotten, worthless cabin? Suddenly, the dust and the despair didn't matter. All that mattered was getting that box open. The padlock on the ammo can was a beast. It was old, rusted, but clearly built to withstand anything. Of course it was. Mark never did anything by halves. For the better part of an hour, I waged a war against it. I tried to jimmy it open with a screwdriver from my car's emergency kit, scraping my knuckles raw. I tried to find a key hidden somewhere nearby, searching the dusty mantelpiece and loose stones of the hearth until my fingers were black with soot. My frustration mounted with every failed attempt, the box sitting there, squat and silent, mocking me with its secrets. Finally, a primal scream of rage tore from my lungs. I was done being delicate. I was done being a victim. I grabbed a heavy, jagged rock from the side of the fireplace, lifted it over my head, and brought it down on the lock with all the force of my grief and anger. The clang of rock against metal was deafening in the small cabin. Once, twice. A third time, a spark flew. On the fifth brutal strike, the rusted metal shrieked in protest, and the lock's hasp twisted and broke apart. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by my own ragged breathing. My hands were shaking, a combination of adrenaline and anticipation, as I lifted the heavy lid. The air that escaped smelled of old paper and something metallic, like old coins. I was half expecting to find a stash of cash, or maybe sentimental items, old photos, a confession, something to explain the inexplicable cruelty of his will. But it was nothing like that. The contents were methodical, impersonal, and utterly baffling. On top was a stack of letters, at least a dozen of them, tied with a simple piece of twine. They were written on thin, almost translucent airmail paper, the handwriting a delicate looping script that was decidedly female. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. This was it then, the sordid, simple explanation. Another woman, a secret life, a secret love he chose to protect over me. With trembling fingers, I untied the twine. The first letter began, "My dearest M." My blood ran cold. I steeled myself for tales of stolen weekends and whispered promises. But as I read, the story that unfolded was far more complex and terrifying than a simple affair. The letters were from a woman named Alara. She never once mentioned love or romance. Instead, she wrote with a fiery passion about business. Their business, a clean energy startup they had apparently founded together in secret. She wrote about technological breakthroughs, about filing patents under shell corporations, about their shared dream of creating a truly sustainable power source. The early letters were filled with hope and excitement. But then, about halfway through the stack, the tone shifted dramatically. The words became tight, fearful, paranoid. She wrote about an investor, a man named Silas Thorne. "He's a shark, M," one letter read. "He smiles and shakes your hand, but he's bleeding the company dry from the inside. He's using our accounts, our infrastructure, as his personal laundromat." The last letter was frantic, the beautiful script devolving into a desperate scrawl. "M, he knows you're digging. He knows you've been making copies. Silas is not a man you cross. He threatened me today. He didn't say it outright, but he made it clear he knows about your family. He mentioned Scottsdale. He mentioned Chloe by name. You have to get out. You need to protect them. Disappear. Burn this. Forget everything. Please, M. He will destroy you all." I dropped the letters as if they were on fire. Silas Thorne. The name was vaguely familiar. A big-shot venture capitalist in Phoenix, a pillar of the community, his face plastered on charity galas and business magazines. Mark had mentioned him once or twice, years ago, calling him a vulture in a $1,000 suit. I thought it was just professional jealousy. My husband wasn't having an affair. He was in a war. He hadn't disinherited me out of spite. He had been trying to erase me, to make me invisible to a predator. This cabin wasn't a punishment. It was a panic room, a breadcrumb in a trail I was never meant to find unless the absolute worst happened. My eyes fell back to the contents of the box. Below where the letters had been was a cheap, prepaid burner phone, the kind you see in spy movies. and a single, small silver key attached to a plain metal ring. It looked like a key for a post office box. With a newfound sense of dread and purpose, I picked up the burner phone. It felt heavy, alien in my hand. I pressed the power button, and the screen flickered to life. There was no call history, no messages, just one contact saved under a single letter. E. Ilara. She was real. And she was the only person in the world who might have the answers I so desperately needed. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my finger hovering over the call button. I was about to step into the secret life my husband had died to keep hidden from me. The phone rang 4 times, each electronic chirp echoing the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. The silence of the cabin pressed in on me, making each ring sound like a siren. I was about to hang up, convinced it was a dead end, a disconnected number from a life that was already over. Then, just as I was pulling the phone away from my ear, the call connected. A woman's voice answered, sharp and breathless, laced with an unmistakable edge of panic. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "My name is Sarah," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. I had to clear my throat and start again. "My name is Sarah Vance. I'm Mark's wife." A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line was followed by a silence so long and heavy I thought she had hung up. I could hear the faint, distant sound of traffic, a world away from my dusty prison. "Ilara?" I prompted, my grip on the cheap plastic phone tightening until my knuckles were white. "He's gone," she finally said, her voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Grief, or maybe fear. "I saw it in the news. The obituary. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I truly am. I never wanted—" "The letters." I cut her off, my patience worn thin by grief and confusion. "I found them. I found the box. What is going on? Who is Silas Thorne, and what did he do to my husband?" "You shouldn't have called this number," she hissed, the panic in her voice escalating. "You have no idea. He could be monitoring. This line is supposed to be clean, but you can't know for sure. You need to destroy that phone. Now." "My husband is dead," I snapped, a surge of hot anger cutting through my fear. It felt good to finally yell at someone. My daughter won't speak to me, and I've been left with nothing but this godforsaken cabin, and a box of secrets that feel like they're going to bury me. I think I have a right to understand what happened to my life. Another tense silence stretched between us. I could picture her on the other end, weighing the risk, deciding if she could trust me. Finally, a sigh of resignation. "Okay," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Okay, listen carefully. Mark and we started a company years ago. The technology was revolutionary. Real, viable, cheap clean energy. Silas was our primary investor. At first, he was a godsend. He gave us everything we needed, but he wasn't investing in the tech, Sarah. He was investing in the infrastructure. He used our legitimate business, our international patents and supply chains, as a front to launder money. Millions and millions of dollars. From God knows where. It all started to click into place. A horrifying, jagged puzzle. So Mark found out. He was trying to expose him? Yes, Ilara confirmed, her voice heavy. He was gathering evidence for over a year. He copied ledgers, transaction records, offshore account numbers. He was building an airtight case. That P.O. box key you found? That's where he kept the physical copies. The originals of everything. He was so close, Sarah. But Silas found out he was digging. He's not just a businessman. He's ex-military intelligence. He has eyes and ears everywhere. He threatened Mark. He threatened to go after you and Chloe to make it look like an accident. A new, sickening thought began to form in my mind. A realization so awful I could barely speak it. The will, I breathed. The house, the money. Leaving it all to Chloe. Leaving me with nothing. It was to protect you, Ilara said softly, and her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Don't you see? If you had inherited everything, you would have been Silas's #1 target. He would have come after you, convinced you had the evidence or knew where it was. By leaving you with nothing but a forgotten cabin, Mark made you look like a scorned wife, a cast-off. He made you insignificant. He made you invisible to save your life. The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a sacrifice, a desperate, brilliant, heartbreaking act of love. He had painted me as a victim to the world to prevent me from becoming a real one. But one piece still didn't fit, a piece that hurt more than anything. Chloe, I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Her reaction at the lawyer's office. She was so cold, so distant, She wasn't surprised at all. She knew. Didn't she? The silence on the other end of the line was my answer, more damning than any words could be. "Oh God," I choked out, sliding down the dusty wall of the cabin until I was sitting on the floor. "She knew everything, Sarah," Alara said, her voice full of a pity I now understood. "Mark had to bring her in a few months ago. He was running out of time and options. He needed someone he could trust implicitly to manage the assets, to move the money into a series of protected trusts where Silas couldn't touch it after he was gone. He made her promise not to tell you, to keep you in the dark, to play the part, that coldness you saw. Sarah, it's the bravest act I've ever seen. She's been carrying this whole terrible burden alone, trying to protect her mother while grieving for her father. My daughter hadn't betrayed me. She had been my silent, solitary guardian. The wall I had built around my heart, the anger and resentment I had nurtured for weeks, crumbled into dust. All I felt was a wave of profound, gut-wrenching shame, and an overwhelming, desperate need to get to my daughter and beg for her forgiveness. I don't remember the drive back to Scottsdale. It was a frantic 2-hour blur of asphalt and regret. I pushed my old Honda harder than it had ever been pushed, my mind racing faster than the engine. Every cold look from Chloe, every clipped sentence, every time she pulled her hand away, it all replayed in my head, but now it was cast in a new, heroic light. I hadn't seen a betrayal. I had been witnessing a performance of incredible strength and sacrifice. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't call ahead. What could I possibly say over the phone? "I'm sorry I thought you were a monster, but it turns out you were just protecting me from one." I used my old key to let myself into the house. It no longer felt like my home. It was quiet and sterile, the warmth and clutter of our family life already scrubbed away. The air smelled of lemon polish and emptiness. I found her in Mark's study, a room I hadn't been able to bring myself to enter since he died. She was surrounded by stacks of financial documents, her laptop open to a spreadsheet so dense with numbers and acronyms it looked like a foreign language. She looked small and exhausted, swallowed by the oversized leather chair, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and immense stress. She was so focused, her brow furrowed in concentration, that she didn't hear me come in. "Chloe," I said softly from the doorway. She jumped, her head snapping up. For a fleeting second, before the mask could slam back into place, I saw it all in her eyes: fear, exhaustion, and a raw, vulnerable relief. It was the look of a soldier who realizes the war might finally be over. "Mom," she said, her voice strained as she tried to regain her composure. "What are you doing here? I thought you were getting settled at the cabin." I didn't answer. I walked across the plush carpet, my steps feeling heavy and deliberate. I reached her desk and placed the burner phone and the small silver P.O. box key on the polished wood in front of her. Her eyes darted from the phone to the key, and then to my face. The color drained from hers. The tough, cold facade she had so carefully constructed for weeks finally shattered like glass. Her shoulders, which had been held so rigidly, slumped in defeat. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another and another. "You found it," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Dad said you would. He said you were the smartest person he knew, and that you'd figure it out when you were ready. That was all it took." The dam of my own guilt and sorrow broke. I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around her. She felt so fragile, so young. She collapsed against me, her body shaking with the sobs she had been holding back for what must have felt like an eternity. We stood there in the middle of her father's study, a mother and daughter who had been forced apart by love, clinging to each other amidst the wreckage of our lives. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she cried into my shoulder, her words muffled by my shirt. "I wanted to tell you so badly. Every day it was killing me, pretending to be that person. But Dad made me promise. He was so scared for you. He said it was the only way." We eventually moved to the sofa, and with the evidence of her secret war spread out on the coffee table, she told me everything. She explained how Mark had first discovered the financial discrepancies, the shell corporations with names that led to nowhere, the massive, untraceable wire transfers. He knew he couldn't go to the police. Silas had people on his payroll, a fact he'd confirmed through a private investigator. He had to build his own case, in secret. "The will was his masterstroke," Chloe explained, her voice gaining strength as she detailed her father's brilliance. "It created a perfect, logical narrative for the outside world. The grieving widow, cast aside for the favored daughter. No one, especially not Silas, would ever suspect you were the key to anything. And the money, she gestured to the laptop. It's not just sitting in a bank. I've been following Dad's instructions, moving it through a series of blind trusts and international LLCs he set up years ago. I'm making it a ghost. I'm protecting it from Silas, and for us. I looked at my daughter, my brilliant, brave 22-year-old daughter, and saw not a child, but a warrior forged in the fires of grief and fear. She had shouldered an impossible burden to honor her father and protect her mother. The pride I felt was a fierce, burning light in the darkness. He left us the tools, Chloe, I said, my voice filled with a new, hard resolve I hadn't felt in years. The letters, the key, the money, and the truth. He didn't just leave us a way to hide. He left us a way to fight back. Chloe looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting mine. A spark of her father's defiant fire ignited in them. What are you saying? I'm saying Silas Thorne took my husband and your father, I said, my voice low and steady, a vow in the quiet room. He tried to tear our family apart. He's not getting away with it. Your father started this fight. We're going to finish it. The next morning, the Arizona sun felt different. It wasn't just a harsh glare anymore. It felt like a spotlight, illuminating our new path. We drove to Flagstaff, a city nestled in the pines that felt a world away from the sleek corporate danger of Scottsdale. Our destination was a small, unassuming mail services store, tucked into a generic strip mall between a laundromat and a pizza parlor. It was the last place anyone would look for the key to dismantling a criminal empire. The P.O. box was registered under a fake name Mark had created, Arthur Finley. Chloe pointed out it was an anagram for finally rat, a dark little joke from her father that made me smile and ache at the same time. He was still with us, in these clever, defiant little details. Chloe, her hands steady despite the gravity of the moment, slid the small silver key into the brass door of box number 314. It opened with a soft, satisfying click. Inside, there was no treasure chest, no stacks of cash. There was only a single, thick, 9 by 12-inch envelope. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with the secrets of a dead man. We didn't wait. We got back in the car, the doors locking us into our own private world, and Chloe carefully sliced the envelope open. There was no dramatic confession, no read this in the event of my death letter. Mark was always more practical than that. Inside was a slim black flash drive and a small, unassuming leather-bound ledger, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. We plugged the flash drive into Chloe's laptop right there in the parking lot, the hum of the laundromat's dryers a mundane soundtrack to the most important moment of our lives. The drive was, of course, protected by a password. "Try Stargazer Lily 25, Chloe murmured without hesitation. It was the name of the flower he brought me on our first date, followed by the number of years we were married. A lump formed in my throat as my fingers flew across the keyboard. Access granted. What we found was breathtaking. It was Mark's entire secret life, meticulously organized into folders and subfolders. There were scanned documents, bank statements from the Cayman Islands, forged shipping manifests, incorporation papers for dozens of shell companies. There were encrypted emails between Silas and his associates, conversations so brazenly criminal they made my skin crawl, and there were audio files. Mark had secretly recorded several of his conversations with Silas. We listened to one, and the sound of my husband's calm, steady voice questioning, probing, followed by Silas's smooth, arrogant replies, was both a comfort and a torment. He had everything. It wasn't just a smoking gun. It was the entire arsenal. Then I opened the ledger. This was the human element. It was handwritten in Mark's familiar, neat block lettering. It was a list of names, dozens of them. People Silas had ruined. Business owners he'd forced into bankruptcy. Inventors whose patents he'd stolen. Families whose life savings had vanished into his schemes. Next to each name, Mark had made notes, detailing the specifics of their ruin, often with newspaper clippings taped to the pages. It was a memorial to the forgotten victims, a testament to Silas's cruelty, and to Mark's quiet, burning determination to see justice done. "We could take this to the FBI right now," Chloe said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and righteous anger. "This is enough to put him away for life. And risk it getting buried by one of Silas's contacts," I countered, shaking my head as Alara's warnings echoed in my ears. Mark's notes even mentioned a specific agent in the Phoenix field office he suspected was on Thorne's payroll. No, The official channels are compromised. If we're going to do this, we do it Mark's way. Smart, quiet, and utterly devastating. A plan began to form in my mind, a risky and audacious scheme born from grief and a cold, calculated rage. Silas thinks in terms of money and power, I said, thinking aloud. That's his language. That's the world he operates in. So that's where we have to beat him. I pulled out the burner phone and called Alara. I told her we had it. We had everything. I told her we weren't going to the authorities. For the first time since I'd spoken to her, the fear in her voice was replaced by a flicker of something else. Hope. What's the plan, Sarah? She asked. The plan, I said, looking at my daughter, who was watching me with a fierce, determined expression that was the spitting image of her father, is that we're going to use Mark's inheritance, both the money and the information, to give Silas Thorne exactly what he deserves. We're not just going to expose him. We're going to orchestrate his downfall. We're going to bankrupt him, humiliate him, and take everything he holds dear, just like he did to us. The three of us, the widow, the daughter, and the partner, formed an unlikely, invisible army. Our war room wasn't a government office, but the kitchen table of the house he had stolen from me. Our weapons weren't guns, but a flash drive, a ledger, and $5 million of ghost money. The game was on. Our strategy was a three-pronged attack, a carefully coordinated assault designed to hit Silas from every angle he valued: his ego, his finances, and his reputation. Chloe was the bait. Alara was the ghost in the machine, and I was the storyteller. Chloe, armed with her $5 million inheritance, was the perfect lure. She shed her grief-stricken persona and transformed into the cliché of a spoiled heiress. Her performance was masterful. She bought a ridiculously flashy Italian sports car in a hideous shade of yellow and made sure she was photographed driving it too fast down Scottsdale Road. She was suddenly a regular at the most exclusive clubs and restaurants, dropping obscene amounts of money and talking loudly about her daddy's money and her desire to become a serious investor. We used a PR firm to plant items in local gossip columns about the tragic party girl heiress looking for a place to park her fortune. Her target was one of Silas's smaller, legitimate-looking tech firms. A company we knew from Mark's files was a primary funnel for his laundering operations. She made a public, audacious offer to buy a significant stake, an offer that was just a little too generous, a little too naive. The bait, shiny and irresistible, was in the water. Meanwhile, Alara, our ghost, went to work from the shadows. Using her old contacts and a deep understanding of the tech world, she began to sow seeds of chaos. She created a phantom threat, a rumor that a major international competitor was planning a hostile takeover of Silas's flagship company. She was an artist of misinformation, fabricating emails from inside sources, leaking fake memos to industry bloggers, and manipulating stock market forums. The phantom threat was designed to make Silas feel squeezed, to make him desperate to shore up his capital to fight a war that didn't exist. He needed a quick, easy infusion of cash. He needed a fool with $5 million. My role was the quietest, and in many ways the most personal. I became a ghost of a different kind. I spent days poring over Mark's ledger, over the stories of the lives Silas had shattered. I found the name that resonated the most: Ben Carter, a sharp, hungry financial journalist for a major online publication. According to Mark's notes, Silas had systematically bankrupted Carter's father a decade earlier. Carter had spent years trying to prove it was deliberate, but could never find the concrete evidence. He had the motive, we had the means. I created an anonymous, encrypted email address and sent him a single, cryptic message. You were right about Silas Thorne. You were right about your father. The proof is coming. Be ready. Then, my campaign began. I used a series of public Wi-Fi hotspots, libraries, coffee shops, hotel lobbies, to cover my tracks, never staying in one place for more than an hour. I began to leak him pieces of the evidence from the flash drive. It was a slow, steady drip, designed to reel him in. A redacted bank statement from a bank in Panama. A 30-second, distorted audio clip of Silas laughing about creative accounting. A single page from the ledger detailing the ruin of another family. I gave him just enough to get him hooked, to get him digging on his own, to let him build the story himself. When the final pieces landed, it would be his explosive exposé, not an anonymous tip. The tension in our house was a living thing. We lived on coffee and adrenaline, tracking Silas's movements online, monitoring the financial news, watching our separate threads slowly weave together into a net. There were close calls, A private investigator Chloe spotted tailing her for a day, forcing her to lay low. A panicked call from Alara when one of her fake memos was almost traced back to her. But we held our nerve. The moment we were waiting for happened on a Tuesday, exactly 2 months to the day after Mark's death. Chloe's phone rang with an unknown number. It was Silas Thorne himself. His voice was smooth as silk, dripping with condescending charm. He had heard about a plucky young woman making waves and wanted to meet personally to discuss her investment. He was taking the bait. He saw a rich, dumb kid he could fleece, and a company he could use to funnel her money into his war chest against the phantom competitor Alara had created. He was walking right into the center of our web. Chloe agreed to the meeting, her voice a perfect blend of flattery and excitement. When she hung up, she looked at me, her face pale but her eyes blazing. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. "Checkmate," she whispered. The day of the meeting was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The air in our house crackled with a nervous energy so intense it was almost visible. While Chloe was getting ready, transforming into the sacrificial lamb, I sat at my laptop in the kitchen and composed my final email to Ben Carter. I attached the master file from the flash drive. Everything. The unredacted bank statements, the full crystal-clear audio recordings, Mark's own detailed notes explaining the entire money laundering scheme, and the complete ledger of victims. My message was simple. Here is the final piece. His meeting with the next victim, Chloe Vance, is at Thorne Industries' 40th floor at 2 p.m. The pin on her lapel is a recording device. Good luck. I hit send and closed the laptop. The ghost had delivered her message. Chloe walked into that gleaming high-rise office in downtown Phoenix, looking every bit the part of the billionaire's daughter, dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit that cost more than my car. But beneath the polished exterior, I knew her heart was hammering. Ilara and I were parked in a garage a block away, a city of steel and glass between us. We had a burner phone open on the dashboard, the line connected to the tiny recording device pinned to Chloe's lapel. It was Mark's old tie pin, a final piece of him in the room for the takedown. Silas Thorne was exactly as we expected, charming, slick, and utterly predatory. We listened as he patronized Chloe, calling her investment plucky and her business acumen refreshing. He assured her he would personally oversee her portfolio to ensure its aggressive growth, a euphemism for funneling her money into his black hole of an empire. He laid out the terms of the deal, which were so laughably one-sided they were essentially theft, giving him complete control of her funds with zero oversight. "It all looks wonderful, Mr. Thorne," Chloe said, her voice a perfect symphony of naive excitement. We could hear the rustle of papers. My father always said to trust a man with a firm handshake in a corner office. As Silas was sliding the signature pages across the massive mahogany desk, his phone, sitting beside him, buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again, a frantic cascade of notifications. Through the pin's microphone, we heard him let out an annoyed sigh. He glanced at it, and his smooth, charming patter stopped cold. On the other side of the city, Ben Carter's story had just gone live on one of the world's biggest news sites. The headline was a digital bomb. Billionaire philanthropist Silas Thorne at center of massive money laundering and fraud ring. FBI investigation demanded. We heard Silas curse, a low, vicious sound. He looked up at Chloe, his charming mask gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury and dawning realization. "What did you do?" he snarled, his voice a venomous whisper. Chloe simply stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She pushed the unsigned papers back across the desk. "My father sends his regards," she said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. Then she turned and walked out of the office, leaving him standing alone amidst the digital ruins of his empire. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The story went viral in minutes. The SEC, spurred by the public outcry and Carter's meticulously detailed evidence, froze all of Thorne's known assets by 4 o'clock. The FBI, their hand forced by the public pressure, raided his offices before the evening news. His partners and associates, seeing the ship was sinking, began turning on him to save themselves, feeding the media and the feds a frenzy of new information. By 6 o'clock, we watched on a live news feed as Silas Thorne, the untouchable titan of industry, was led from his office in handcuffs, his $1,000 suit looking rumpled and cheap. That night, Chloe and I drove back to the cabin. It didn't look so dilapidated anymore. We had hired a local contractor to fix the roof and shore up the porch. It was clean, sturdy, and peaceful. We sat on the porch steps, the cool night air smelling of pine and justice. Ilara was on her way, planning to use her share of the funds, which Chloe was already working to legally recover, to finally restart the clean energy company she and Mark had dreamed of. We had done it. We had honored Mark's memory, not with tears, but with righteous action. We had taken the worst moment of our lives and forged it into a weapon. The cabin wasn't an insult. It was a sanctuary, a starting point. The inheritance wasn't the money. It was the strength we found in each other and the courage to finish the fight our husband and father had started. He hadn't left me with nothing. He had left me with everything that truly mattered. A mission, a future, and my daughter, stronger and more brilliant than I ever could have imagined. Thank you all so much for coming on this journey with me. It's been a wild, emotional ride, and your support has meant the world. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure you're following for more stories to come. You never know what secrets are waiting to be uncovered.